Hello everybody, this is Dedra with Paper Crafts and Planners. This is the first video in a series I'm calling Stamping 101. This first video we're going to talk about the different types of inks, how they react to different mediums, and what's out on the market. I certainly don't have every manufacturer represented here, but I have, I think, every type of ink that's on the market right now. Video number 2, we're going to talk about, excuse me, we're going to talk about stamps, the different types of stamps, how you take care of your stamps, how you can store your stamps, and a few tools that help you get a really good impression with your stamps. Video number 3, we're going to do some advanced techniques like heat embossing, masking, and we'll play a little bit with Distress Oxide for backgrounds for our stamping. Okay, so let's get started. First, what I've done is I've taken the different types of inks and I've taken the two same stamps for everything. So this Celebrate and this little flower, and these are red rubber etched stamps in case you're wondering. So let me set those to the side. So I've taken the same two and I've taken a positioning tool, stamp positioning tool, and stamped each one of these twice so that you really get a good idea of how they look, each one, how vibrant they are, that kind of thing. So the first one up here is the Stazon Ink, and it is a solvent ink. And a reason you might want to have that in your collection of inks is because it can stamp on plastic, metal, glass, ceramic, laminated paper, leather, different mediums like that, different materials. And it does have a little bit of a drying time. So as soon as you stamp it, you're going to want to let it set for maybe a minute before you go touching the stamp surface, especially if it's on something very slick. If it's on just a paper like this, it's fine. It's not going to smear right away. But something vellum or plastic, it's going to smear if you touch it right away. So give it a little bit of drying time and then it will be permanent. So this is not something you want to use for memory keeping. It is not acid free, but it is a good multi-purpose for DIY projects. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take an alcohol marker, see how it reacts to that, and then we're going to take a watercolor marker and see how it reacts. And I'm using my least favorite color of watercolor because I'm worried some of these are going to ruin the tip. Okay, so this solvent ink reacts really nicely with alcohol markers, which I expected it would. It shouldn't move around, especially as it's had some drying time. And then here is the watercolor. And of course it's making that line a little darker, but I don't think it's moving the ink around. We'll give it just a second here. And I'm going to go outside the line a little bit just to see if we can get some movement here with this ink. Okay, I think it did a really good job. I don't think it moved around a lot. It made the line brighter, but it doesn't look like it made the line any thicker. In other words, it didn't spread that ink at all. So that is the solvent ink, and it is by Stazon. Okay, the next one we're going to try is a Fun Stamper's Journey, and I'm just using this mini, but I have it in the big size, and I have a lot of different colors. It comes in a lot of colors. And it's called a fusion ink, which means it is a fusion between pigment and dye ink. So it dries quickly like a dye ink, but it is a little more vibrant. You can kind of see it's pretty bright like a pigment ink. And you can heat emboss with it like a pigment ink if you do it really quickly while it's still wet. If you put the embossing powder on while it's still wet. And for alcohol markers, they recommend that you heat set them, but it's really not doing a bad job now that I've let it dry as long as I have. I don't think there's any movement there with the alcohol marker. So just let it dry and you should be able to use alcohol markers with it. And here is the watercolor. And again, I'm not seeing, let me go outside the line, make sure, but I'm not seeing any big movement on this either. And it doesn't look like it's made the line any thicker. I think it did a good job on both of those. Okay, the next one is a Close to My Heart ink, and this is the only one I didn't stamp in black because for some reason I don't have it in black, but this charcoal is really close to black. It's a dark. And this is a water-based dye ink, and it is acid-free, as is this Fun Stamper's Journey. I forgot to say that. So you can use it around your pictures and your memory keeping without it damaging anything. Okay, so let's do the watercolor. And I'm being really heavy-handed with these because I want to get a definite, see what the reaction is. It's not too bad. Let's give it a minute to see if it spreads that out any. Those others haven't moved, so let's hope this one doesn't. Now, I would expect it to do really well with these alcohol markers because they sell these alcohol markers, Close to My Heart does. So it should handle these really well. And it does. Now, I think, okay, so let's take a look at this. I think with the watercolor, it may have made that line a little bit thicker. It looks a little bit thicker than the image above, but it really didn't move the ink around at all. I think it did a good job on both of these. Okay, so that's a dye ink. The next one is called Squid Ink. It's a Jane Davenport ink, and I think it's squid just because it's black. It comes in different colors. I only have the black. She calls it a hybrid, which means it's between a pigment and a dye also. She says it's acid-free and archival, so you can use it around your pictures. Waterproof, alcohol marker friendly once dry. So it should work really well because I've let this dry. Fade and smear resistant, heat set on glass, fabric, wood, plastic. So it says you can use it on the same surfaces that you can the Stazon if you heat set it. So I have not tried that to know, but I would imagine it's true that they wouldn't put that in their marketing if it didn't work. Okay, so I'm going to go outside the lines a little bit. And I'm not seeing any movement with the alcohol marker. It's working really well. And let's do the watercolor here. See how that does. And again, this is no special paper. I don't know if I mentioned that, but this paper is not watercolor paper. It is just an 80-pound Fun Stamper's Journey white paper. So nothing special about this paper. And I think it did a really good job on the watercolor also. I'm not seeing any movement yet. We'll come back and look at these as it's had a little drying time and see if it changes at all, but so far so good. Okay, the next one is Versa Magic, and this is a multi-surface chalk ink, they say. And I have this in a lot of colors because it comes in these little dewdrops, and it tends to set on the paper rather than soak in. Dye inks soak in, just like dyeing your hair. They soak into the paper, and this kind of wet, more towards a pigment ink, tends to set on top for a while at least. And that way it's good for surfaces that you don't want to have any shadowing or bleed through. Okay, so let's try. All right, so we're getting a whole lot of movement with this. It is actually turning the blue. You can see how much darker it is. It is moving this color into the ink into the blue of the alcohol marker. So it's not keeping it in place. The ink is moving. Yeah, it's doing the same thing with the watercolor. So, but I wouldn't expect anything else because it is a pigment type ink and it's really not made to go with these different types of mediums. They don't profess that it's going to work really well on that. And what it does work well on is, like I said, if you're a planner, this is a nice one to have. So yes, it definitely moved that around. Okay, the next one is Distress Oxide. It's made by Ranger, designed by Tim Holtz. This is the black soot. So let's read what he says here. Water reactive dye and pigment ink fusion that creates an oxidized effect when sprayed with water. So this reacts big time to water. So I'm not expecting it to do really well. It's going to do well with the watercolor marker. It's going to do what it's supposed to do, which is move. And you could see it's turned the green a different color. It's mixed that black in with there and made a different color, but that is what it's designed to do. So I would not use this with your watercolors unless you want a really funky mixed media look. Let's see how it's going to do with the alcohol marker. Actually, it's not doing, I expected it would move the alcohol marker around and really create a mess, but it is not. It's working with the alcohol marker just like the dye inks did, or the fusion inks for sure. So you can use it with alcohol marker. It's alcohol marker friendly once it's dried. But as far as watercolors, I wouldn't use either the pigment or the Distress Oxide unless it's a look you're going for. Okay, I have one more type of ink, and this is strictly a pigment ink. And the reason I stamped it separately is because we're not going to do a lot of playing with it. It stays wet a long time, and there's a reason for that. It is made to heat emboss. So you can sprinkle on embossing powder and dry it with the heat gun, and it creates a really beautiful effect. This is the only color I have. I have mostly clear pigment inks because that's what I like to heat emboss with, and I use colored powders. but this is the only one. And so once it's dry, it's staying in place nicely. But like I said, it is not made to go with these other types of mediums. People mostly use it to heat emboss, but it is beautiful. This one is called, this is by Brilliance, and it's a pearlescent. And so I don't know if you can really get the full effect, but it is very shiny and very beautiful. And that's the benefit of having pigment inks. Also, it can be used in a planner as long as you don't mind a little bit of drying time before you go writing in your planner. So these are the different types of inks, how they reacted, what they're for, what the manufacturer says they're designed for. And we will come back in our next video and talk about stamps, how to take care of them, and how to store them, and the different types that are on the market. I really appreciate you watching my videos. There'll be links to all these products below, at least the ones that I can find still on the market. I've had some of them a long time. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. Happy crafting.